I want to drop you right into the middle of just a completely surreal historical image.
Oh, yeah, the shingle.
Yes, the shingle. So picture this, right? It is early 1917. The Russian Empire, which is this 300-year-old autocratic regime, is utterly collapsing.
Just falling apart at the seams.
Exactly. The capital is literally in flames. You have millions of soldiers dying on the front lines of World War I in unimaginably brutal conditions.
Right. The trenches, the starvation.
Yeah, and the masses are pouring into these freezing streets demanding bread and peace.
And so what is the supreme leader doing?
Right. What is the czar of all the Russias doing in response to this monumental world-shattering crisis?
Well, he has retreated to his private train car.
He's hiding. And according to the historical record, he is literally waving a magical wooden shingle on a string out the window.
A magical shingle.
Yes, a piece of wood, trying to, like, change the political weather.
I mean, it is an image that genuinely sounds like a heavy-handed piece of surrealist fiction.
It really does.
You could easily mistake it for, a dark satire about the sheer incompetence of a ruling class.
Yeah, a class that has become completely detached from physical reality.
Exactly. The autocracy had basically just retreated into mysticism while the country burned around them.
It is staggering. I mean, just the disconnect. But then, if you fast forward just a few months to the late summer of that exact same year...
Oh, whiplash is crazy.
It is. We go from a czar waving a magical shingle in the winter to this incredibly elite, highly organized military coup in August.
Right, led by the top general.
Led by top generals,
Yeah.
utilizing the fiercest, most terrifying cavalry divisions in the world, and they are aiming straight for the capital.
And that coup is stopped dead in its tracks.
Completely paralyzed.
Yeah.
But, and this is the crazy part, not by a massive opposing army in a pitched, bloody battle.
No, not at all.
It is defeated by train switchmen.
And telegraph operators.
And factory workers.
Yeah. This elite military force is essentially swallowed whole by the logistical infrastructure of the country itself. The juxtaposition between those two moments is just incredible.
It really frames the whole year.
Right, because you have the absolute peak of autocratic detachment. On one hand, a regime that thinks divine right and magical charms can stop a revolution.
Which obviously didn't work.
Right. And on the other hand, you have the absolute raw, ground-level power of the working class.
Utilizing the industrial nervous system of a modern nation.
Exactly. Using that system to just dismantle a military threat.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. So welcome to the Deep Dive.
I'm glad to be here.
Our mission today for you, the listener, is to examine one of the most chaotic, misunderstood, and frankly cinematic periods in modern history.
The summer and fall of 1917 in Russia.
Specifically, we are diving into chapters 26 through 32 of Leon Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, alongside the rigorous, really groundbreaking archival findings of historian Alexander Rabinowitz.
Yeah, we are going to look at the terrified reaction of the wealthy classes.
The bizarre secret plot between a prime minister and a general.
And the astonishing mechanical way regular people dismantled a military insurrection.
But before we jump into the timeline, I know we need to get a quick disclaimer out of the way.
Yeah, I do want to provide a very clear disclaimer to you, the listener. The source material we are examining today covers deeply polarizing, highly politically charged history.
To say the least.
Right. We're talking about socialist revolutions, the struggles of liberal democracies, and the looming threat of fascist military dictatorships.
So high stakes.
Very high. And our role here is strictly to impartially report on the factual content, the arguments, and the historical analysis provided in these specific sources.
We're just the messengers.
Exactly. We are looking at Trotsky's first-hand accounts and Rabinowicz's meticulous archival data to convey the ideas contained within them. We are not endorsing any political viewpoints.
Nope.
We're simply exploring the historical mechanics of how power operated, shifted, and was contested in this very specific moment in time.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We need to set the stage for you. It is post-February 1917.
The first revolution has happened.
Right. The Romanov dynasty, which ruled for 3 centuries, has just been overthrown in a massive, chaotic, popular uprising.
But Russia is still stuck in the meat grinder of World War I.
Yeah. The Tsar is gone, but the fundamental problems, the starvation, the war, the land disputes, they are very much not gone.
They're arguably worse.
And instead of a clear, functioning new government, we get this incredibly weird, unstable situation that the sources call dual power.
Dual power.
But before we even define dual power, we really need to do a quick vocabulary check.
Oh, definitely.
Because this period is essentially an alphabet soup of political factions, and if we don't define them for the listener right now, we're going to lose them completely.
That is a very necessary step. To understand the summer of 1917, you really need to understand the three main political camps.
Okay, break it down for us.
First, you have the political right, which represents what the sources call the possessing classes.
Possessing as in they possess all the wealth.
Exactly. These are the wealthy landowners, the nobility, the industrialists, and their main political party was called the Cadets.
Cadets, which stands for Constitutional Democrats, right?
Right. They wanted a capitalist republic or maybe even a constitutional monarchy that protected private property and, crucially, kept Russia in World War I.
Okay, so the cadets are the old elites trying to hold on to the steering wheel.
Yes.
So who was in the middle?
The middle consists of the moderate socialists.
Moderate socialists. Okay.
This group is primarily made up of the Mensheviks and the right socialist revolutionaries, or right SRs.
So they're socialists but moderate.
Technically, yes, they were socialists, but they were deeply committed to a very specific interpretation of Marxist theory.
Which was?
They believed that Russia was economically backward and therefore had to go through a long, extended period of bourgeois capitalism and liberal democracy before it could even think about a socialist revolution.
Oh, wow. So they're socialists who want capitalism first.
Exactly. So their strategy was to support the possessing classes and try to gently push them toward reforms rather than seizing power themselves.
I really want to bookmark that because that theoretical commitment to just like waiting for capitalism to mature seems like it becomes a massive liability for them later on.
Oh, it becomes their defining fatal flaw.
And then on the far left.
On the far left, you have the radical socialists, dominated by the Bolsheviks.
Right, led by figures like Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky.
Correct. And the Bolsheviks completely rejected that moderate approach.
They weren't interested in waiting.
Not at all. They argued that the Russian bourgeoisie was just too weak and too tied to foreign capital to ever bring about real democratic reforms or end the war.
So what was their plan?
Their position was that the workers and poor peasants needed to seize power immediately to stop the war and prevent a counter-revolution.
Okay, so that clears up the board nicely. We have the cadets on the right, the moderate socialists in the middle, and the Bolsheviks on the left.
That's the landscape.
So how does this translate into the concept of dual power? Because frankly, it sounds like a recipe for total governmental paralysis.
Paralysis is the exact right word for it. When the autocracy collapsed, power didn't just cleanly transfer to a new parliament like you might expect.
Right.
It fractured into two competing hostile institutions.
Okay, what's the first one?
On one side, you had the provisional government.
The official guys.
Right. This was the official formal government, largely made up of the cadets and later joined by the moderate socialists.
So they had the fancy titles?
They had the titles, they met in the lavish palaces, they issued decrees, and they were recognized by the foreign embassies, Britain, France.
Right, but
they had a massive fatal problem. They had no actual physical force backing them up.
because the physical force, the actual levers of society, belong to the other side of the equation.
Exactly. The other half of the dual power was the Petrograd Soviet of Workers' and Soldiers' Deputies.
Just Soviet.
Right. And these were democratically elected councils. Soviet just means council in Russian.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so they represented the factories and the military garrisons, and they held the actual physical power in the capital.
So they controlled the boots on the ground.
The boots, the trains, the telegraph lines, the printing presses, and most importantly, they had the absolute loyalty of the troops.
So you have an official government that literally cannot send a train or issue a military order without the permission of the Soviet.
Which is wild. And you have a Soviet that has all the physical power, but because it is led initially by those moderate socialists we talked about.
The ones waiting for capitalism.
Right. Because of them, the Soviet refuses to officially take the reins of government.
It is such a bizarre arrangement. Just to, understand the mechanics of this. Let's say the provisional government wants to send a regiment to the front lines to fight the Germans. What actually happens?
Okay, so the provisional government would issue the order, the commanders would receive it, but the soldiers in the regiment would say, we don't recognize this order unless it is countersigned by the Petrograd Soviet. So the government has to go to the Soviet, hat in hand, and beg them to approve the order.
And the Soviet does what?
The Soviet debates it, maybe stamps it, maybe doesn't.
That friction is immense.
It is a state constantly at war with itself.
Which brings us to those possessing classes, the cadets, the landlords, the wealthy industrialists. According to the sources, they were absolutely terrified of this arrangement.
Oh, they were in a state of profound alarm.
I mean, I guess they didn't want to rely on the goodwill of an armed, radicalized populace that had literally just overthrown a czar.
Exactly. Initially, these possessing classes desperately wanted to keep the monarchy.
They just wanted it slightly rebranded.
Right, they wanted it without the embarrassing, mystic influence of Grigory Rasputin and the Tsar's incompetent inner circle.
Trotsky's history notes a very telling detail about the mindset of the royals right before the fall, doesn't it?
Oh, the apple story. Yes.
So crazy.
The Tsarina sent the Tsar an apple that had been blessed by Rasputin, urging him to eat it to strengthen his will.
Just a magic apple to fix the revolution.
Right. And she wrote to him, "Be Peter the Great, Ivan the Terrible, crush them all under your feet."
So that was their political strategy.
Total violent suppression of the unrest.
But when the masses couldn't be crushed, and the monarchy actually disintegrated in February, those wealthy elites had to scramble.
They had to pivot instantly.
Yeah, but they did.
When the Romanovs were swept away, the possessing classes, the Council of Trade and Industry, the United Nobility, the Cadet Party, they all suddenly threw their support behind the new provisional government.
But the sources emphasize that they didn't do this out of a sudden newfound love for liberal democracy or parliamentary procedure, right?
No, not at all. They did it because the provisional government was the only available shield against the masses.
It was a buffer.
A desperate buffer to protect their landed estates, their factories, and their traditional social dominance from the increasingly radicalized workers and peasants.
But this dual power setup, this constant friction between the palaces and the factories, was completely unsustainable.
It was doomed from the start.
The sources point out that the official government, which eventually came to be led by Alexander Kerensky, was basically sinking.
Yeah, Trotsky describes Kerensky's regime as a peat bog of verbal improvisations.
A peat bog. That's a great insult.
It's a brilliant metaphor because a peat bog has no solid foundation. If you step on it, you sink.
Right.
The possessing classes quickly realized that this provisional government under Kerensky was utterly incapable of putting the masses back in their place.
They were just stuck in this situation where the official government was constantly negotiating, compromising, issuing these flowery decrees that the army and the workers simply ignored.
And meanwhile, the elites were losing money, the army was disintegrating, and the peasants were starting to violently seize noble estates in the countryside.
Now, I'm struggling with this a bit because everything we're generally taught in standard history classes paints Alexander Kerensky and the provisional government as, like, the tragic heroes of a doomed democracy.
That is the popular myth, yes.
Right. The standard narrative is that Russia had this brief, beautiful moment of liberal democracy that was tragically stolen from them by radical extremists later on. Are Trotsky and Rabinowitz arguing that this entire narrative is essentially fake?
They're fundamentally challenging it, yes.
That Kerensky was just keeping the seat warm for a dictator?
The sources argue that the liberal democracy of the provisional government was a mirage.
A mirage.
It wasn't a stable, self-sustaining system putting down deep democratic roots. It was merely a transitional phase.
Okay, transitioning to what?
As the unrest grew, the possessing classes began to view the provisional government not as a permanent democratic institution, but as a temporary tool to buy time.
Buy time for what, though?
They were waiting until they could find a strongman, a military dictator, to violently crush the Soviets and hand absolute power back to the bourgeoisie.
Wow.
They realized that you cannot govern a country in the middle of a massive social revolution and a world war through endless committee meetings and compromised half measures.
So to put a mechanical spin on it, it sounds like Kerensky was driving a car with two steering wheels.
I like that analogy.
Right. The official government is desperately trying to turn the car right toward continuing the war and protecting property.
And the Soviet is pulling the emergency trucks and trying to turn left?
Exactly. And the wealthy cadet passengers in the back seat have just decided they are completely done with this ride.
They are terrified.
They want to hire a ruthless military driver to throw the Soviet completely out of a moving car.
That captures the mechanical reality of dual power perfectly. And what's crucial for the listener to take away here is what this reveals about the fragility of democratic institutions in moments of extreme crisis.
Yeah, how fast it all falls apart.
The historical analysis in our sources shows how astonishingly fast elite classes will abandon democratic norms and parliamentary procedures when their fundamental property rights and social power are threatened by popular uprisings.
So the moment the provisional government could no longer guarantee their interests,
The possessing classes stopped talking about democracy entirely and immediately began clamoring for law and order at the end of a bayonet.
Okay, so if you are Kerensky, sitting in the Winter Palace, realizing the center has completely vanished and both the left and the right disguise you, what is your next move?
You're in a terrible spot.
Because that desperation leads us directly into August of 1917 and this incredible event called the Moscow State Conference.
Yes.
Based on the outline, this sounds less like a legislative assembly and more like an audition for the role of dictator.
It was a deeply theatrical attempt to manufacture authority out of thin air.
Theater.
Yeah, Kerensky could feel the ground quaking under his feet in Petrograd. The capital was far too radicalized, and it was dominated by Bolsheviks and the armed workers.
So he needs a safer venue.
Right.
Aye.
He decides he needs to project an image of national unity and unshakable strength, so he moves the political theater to Moscow, which was considered slightly more conservative and traditional.
And he summons this massive state conference.
A huge event, 1,500 delegates from across the country.
But the way he organizes this conference is fascinating to me because he completely rigs the guest list.
He absolutely does.
He doesn't hold an election to see who should attend. He artificially stacks the deck using a very specific formula, right?
Right. He mandates that exactly 50% of the delegates represent the possessing classes, the industrialists, the bankers, the conservative generals, the old Duma members.
And the other half.
The other 50% represent the people, the Soviets, the moderate socialists, and the trade unions.
But I read that he completely ignored the actual democratic municipal election results that were happening across the country at that exact time.
He did.
And those elections overwhelmingly favored the socialist and radical left.
Correct.
So why would he force a 50-50 split in a country that was clearly leaning far left?
Kerensky was trying to artificially engineer a political equilibrium that simply did not exist in the real world.
He wanted to be the hero in the middle.
Exactly. By forcing a perfect 50-50 split, he wanted to position himself as the indispensable fulcrum.
The balancer.
He wanted to stand right in the center, acting as the supreme, unshakable arbiter of the nation, balancing the furious bourgeoisie on his right and the restless democracy on his left.
He thought he could control them both by playing them off each other.
But the underlying psychology of the conference completely backfired.
I can imagine. You put 1,500 people who fundamentally despise each other in one room, and it's not going to look like national unity.
It looked like a powder keg.
Trotsky's description of the physical space inside the Bolshoi theater is incredible.
So vivid.
Instead of projecting unity, the conference became this glaring, terrifying showcase of the country's fatal split.
The two halves of the auditorium literally glared at each other across the aisle with pure, unadulterated hatred.
Just staring each other down.
On the right side, you had the starched uniforms of the generals, the frock coats of the industrialists, and the diamonds of the wealthy elite.
And on the left,
On the left side, you had the rough worker blouses, the muddy boots of the soldiers' deputies, and the plain jackets of the socialist intellectuals.
it was a visual representation of a pending civil war.
It really was. In fact, to show you how deep the divide was, the radical left in Moscow organized a massive general strike to welcome the conference.
To welcome them, right?
The city was totally paralyzed. Even the waiters at the Bolshoi Theater, who were supposed to serve tea to the delegates, went on strike.
That is an amazing detail. The elites are trying to plot the future of the empire, and they can't even get a cup of tea because the staff has walked out to join the revolution.
Yeah, they're sitting there parched.
Into this incredibly tense, visually divided, hostile room walks General Laver Kornilov.
Ah, yes. Kornilov.
He had just been appointed commander-in-chief of the Russian army, and his entrance sounds like it was choreographed by a Hollywood director.
It was pure spectacle.
I want you to describe this because the sources paint a wild picture.
Kornilov's arrival was designed to be a spectacle of sheer military power and right-wing adulation. Right.
He arrives at the Moscow train station, and he is treated not like a general, but like a conquering emperor.
Flowers and everything.
He is met by a massive crowd of wealthy elites, the cadet party leadership, and conservative politicians showering him with flowers.
And he had a very specific bodyguard, didn't he?
Yes. He is escorted everywhere by his personal bodyguard, these fiercely loyal, red-robed Turkoman cavalrymen armed with bared sabers.
Bared sabers in a train station.
And when he steps onto the platform, he is greeted by the Women's Battalion of Death standing at strict attention.
Why such an intense, almost religious level of fanfare for a general?
Because to the possessing classes sitting on the right side of the Bolshoi theater, Kornilov represented salvation.
He was the guy.
He was the iron fist they had been waiting for. He was the man who was finally going to sweep away the Soviets, hang the Bolsheviks, and restore discipline to the army and the factories.
And the hostility between Kerensky and Kornilov at this conference was palpable.
Well, they hated each other. They both wanted to be the savior of Russia, but they despised each other.
Right. Kerensky viewed himself as the indispensable political genius.
The great orator.
The only man whose brilliant speaking could hold the fractured country together.
And Kornilov.
Kornilov viewed Kerensky as a weak, talkative, cowardly lawyer who was letting the Russian Empire be destroyed by socialist rabble.
And Kornilov wasn't exactly subtle about his ambitions either.
No, he was very open about it.
The sources quote him speaking to other conservative generals in private. When asked if he would compromise with the government, Kornilov flat out says, "No, sir. Give me the power, and then I will make a decisive fight."
He had absolutely zero intention of sharing power with the Soviets, or even with Kerensky in the long run.
He viewed the politicians as an obstacle to military order.
And Kerensky was acutely aware of this.
He had to be.
He had intelligence reports. He knew Kornilov was being groomed by the political right to eventually replace him.
So the tension in the theater when Kornilov finally took the stage to speak must have been suffocating.
It was. The right side of the hall erupted into a standing ovation, cheering wildly.
And the left side?
The left side of the hall sat in dead, defiant silence.
Okay, this brings up a massive question about Kerensky's strategy.
What's that?
If Kerensky knew Kornilov was a massive threat, a guy who was actively being positioned to overthrow him, why on earth did he bring him to Moscow and give him this massive platform?
It's a great question.
Was he trying to play a psychological game? Like, was he trying to intimidate the left with the looming threat of Kornilov's bayonets, while simultaneously trying to intimidate Kornilov by showing him the sheer size and anger of the left?
That was precisely his gamble. Kerensky was trying to play both sides against the middle, believing his own myth that he was the only one smart enough to control the outcome.
So arrogant.
Extremely. He thought he could use Kornilov as a boogeyman to scare the moderate socialists into giving him more executive power,
Right.
while using the threat of a Bolshevik uprising to keep Kornilov reliant on his legal authority as prime minister.
But the reality was that Kerensky was utterly powerless, and everyone in the room knew it.
There's a highly illustrative moment from the conference that Trotsky highlights to demonstrate this.
Oh, I know the one you mean.
Yeah, while Kerensky is on stage giving a highly emotional, threatening speech, trying to assert his dictatorial authority over the room, a notorious right-wing, deeply conservative politician named Purishkevich shouts from his seat.
Just interrupts him.
Yells right at him. He shouts that the delegates in the room are merely supers to the government.
Supers. What does that mean in this context?
Supers is a theatrical term for supernumeraries extras.
Ah, like background actors?
Exactly. Purishkevich was loudly mocking the entire assembly, pointing out that everyone sitting in the Bolshoi theater were just theatrical extras in a fake play directed by Kerensky.
It perfectly highlighted the hollow, powerless nature of Kerensky's assembly.
He was standing on stage demanding absolute obedience from a country that had completely stopped listening to him.
And was actively organizing for a civil war. So Kerensky leaves Moscow humiliated. He realizes he has no actual power. He just has the illusion of power.
Right.
If you are a prime minister with a fake government, how do you get real power?
You have to borrow it from a guy with a real army.
Exactly. And that desperate realization is what births the most bizarre, cynical political conspiracy of the century.
It really is.
Because the historical myth, the story that was told in textbooks for a long time, was that General Kornilov simply went rogue.
That's the classic narrative.
That he acted completely alone, leading a right-wing mutiny against the legitimate, innocent, democratic government.
But the source truth, the actual archival record, shows that this was not a solo mission.
No.
Kerensky and Kornilov were initially in on the plot together.
This is one of the most fascinating and dark revelations of this period.
The narrative moves from the bright public theater of the Moscow conference to a deeply secret, treasonous conspiracy. Behind the backs of the Soviets who had initially given him his power, and behind the backs of his own cabinet ministers, Prime Minister Kerensky entered into a secret agreement with Commander-in-Chief Kornilov.
To do what?
To essentially stage a military occupation of his own capital
The details of this request are shocking. Kerensky literally requested that Kornilov send elite combat troops to Petrograd for the explicit purpose of crushing the Bolsheviks and permanently dismantling the Soviets.
He was asking for a military purge of the working class?
And he didn't just ask for any troops. I read that he specifically requested the 3rd Cavalry Corps, which included a highly feared unit known as the Savage Division.
Yes, the Savage Division.
Why would Kerensky request that specific unit?
The reasoning behind requesting the Savage Division reveals the profound cynicism of the provisional government.
How so?
Well, the Savage Division was officially the Caucasian Native Cavalry Division. It was made up of volunteer mountaineers from the Caucasus Chechens, Ingish, Circassians, and others. The crucial factor for Kerensky and Kornilov was that the vast majority of these soldiers did not speak Russian. And they were culturally isolated from the urban working class of Petrograd.
So it was a language barrier strategy.
Exactly. Kerensky and his inner circle knew that regular Russian infantry units were highly susceptible to revolutionary propaganda.
Right, because the standard Russian soldier was just a peasant in a uniform.
A peasant who wanted land and peace, just like the workers.
So if you sent a regular Russian regiment into Petrograd to shoot the workers,
The workers would simply walk up to the soldiers, explain what was happening, explain that they were fighting for the same cause, and the soldiers would likely mutiny and refuse to fire.
they just join them.
Exactly. So Kerensky explicitly requested non-Russian speaking cavalry, hoping they would be completely immune to Bolshevik agitation.
You wanted troops who couldn't understand the pleas of the workers.
Right. Troops who would just blindly follow their officers' orders to clear the streets with sabers.
It's an incredible historical irony. The so-called democratic prime minister of a revolution is ordering non-Russian speaking cavalry, drawn from populations historically oppressed by the Tsar.
To slaughter the democratic councils of his own capital city.
But the plot, this grand conspiracy between the politician and the general, falls apart in the most absurd, almost comedic way possible.
It's like a farce.
And it is all thanks to a man named Vladimir Lvov.
Oh, Lvov.
Who is this guy, and how does he blow up the conspiracy?
Vladimir Lvov is one of those historical figures who seems like an invention of a satirist, but he was very real.
Just a total wild card.
Yeah, he was a former member of the government, a rather bumbling, self-important figure who fancied himself a master diplomat and a great savior of the nation.
Okay, so what does he do?
He decides, entirely on his own initiative, to act as a secret intermediary between Kerensky in Petrograd and Kornilov at military headquarters in Mogilev.
Without anyone asking him to.
Pretty much. So Lvov visits Kornilov, assuming that both men are on the exact same page.
That they both just want to establish a strong, unified dictatorship to save Russia.
Exactly. But Kornilov, feeling emboldened by the support of the wealthy classes, is remarkably blunt with Lvov. He lays his cards on the table.
Yeah, Kornilov basically tells Lvov, I don't want a joint dictatorship with Kerensky. He is too weak.
Right.
Tell Kerensky to resign immediately, hand all supreme military and civil power over to me, and come to my headquarters so I can protect him.
Which is military speak for surrender to me so I can keep you under house arrest.
Exactly. So Lvov absorbs this terrifying message.
Travels back to Petrograd and goes to the Winter Palace to deliver it to Kerensky.
He tells the prime minister that his co-conspirator is actually planning to depose him and establish a personal military dictatorship.
And this revelation leads to one of the most bizarre exchanges in political history.
The teletype clash.
Yes, Kerensky is panicked. He realizes he has invited a tiger into his house, and the tiger is hungry.
He needs to confirm if Lvov is telling the truth or if Lvov is just crazy.
So Kerensky rushes to the War Ministry and gets on the direct wire telegraph, which at the time was a Hughes teleprinter machine.
Directly connected to Kornilov's headquarters.
Exactly.
And the way he handles this is like something out of a cheap spy novel.
It really is.
He doesn't confront Kornilov as the prime minister. He essentially runs a wiretap sting operation.
He literally impersonates Vladimir Lvov on the wire.
He types into the machine, I, Vladimir Nikolaevich,
Right.
ask you whether it is necessary to act on that definite decision which you asked me to communicate privately to Alexander Fyodorovich.
He is actively feeding Kornilov lines to get his own commanding general to confess to treason on the record.
He is running a blind double-cross.
And Kornilov, sitting at his machine hundreds of miles away, assumes he is either speaking directly to Lvov or that Kerensky is standing right there fully on board with his own surrender.
So Kornilov confirms it.
The ticker tape comes back reading, "Yes, I confirm. my urgent plea that he should come to Mogilev. Now, some later historians tried to frame this entire event as a tragic miscommunication, a simple misunderstanding between two patriots.
But as Trotsky and Rabinowitz point out, this was no misunderstanding.
No, this was the inevitable explosion of the dual power translated into raw personal ambition.
Both men wanted to be the strong man.
Kerensky thought he was cleverly using Kornilov's troops to secure his own dictatorship and crush the left.
And Kornilov thought he was using Kerensky's legal authority as a smokescreen to secure his dictatorship and crush both the left and Kerensky. It's like two corporate CEOs orchestrating a highly illegal, hostile takeover of a rival company only to realize mid-heist that they've accidentally hired the exact same hitman to take each other out.
That is exactly what happened. And the moment Kerensky reads that ticker tape and realizes that he is the one on the chopping block,
that Kornilov has no intention of sharing power,
he just instantly flips.
total panic sets in. Kerensky abruptly flips the script.
The man who just the day before was begging Kornilov to send the Savage Division now issues a frantic manifesto declaring Kornilov a traitor to the revolution.
He orders Kornilov to surrender his command.
This sudden reversal throws the entire right-wing conspiracy into absolute chaos.
Because everyone is suddenly exposed.
The generals, the wealthy industrialists, and the cadet politicians who had been aggressively backing Kornilov tried desperately to backtrack.
They scrambled to claim it was all a big mistake.
Kerensky, realizing he might have just alienated the entire military command, even tried to pull back his own manifesto declaring Kornilov a traitor.
He wanted to negotiate.
But it was too late. The printing presses were already running, the declarations were on the streets.
The die was cast. The military coup had officially begun.
Kornilov versus Kerensky.
So the prime minister and the general have officially broken up. Kornilov is declared a rebel.
But Kornilov doesn't care about Kerensky's pieces of paper.
No. He gives the order, and his elite troops, the 3rd Cavalry Corps, including the fearsome Savage Division, are loaded onto trains and are heading straight for Petrograd to take the city by force.
And Kerensky is completely powerless.
He has no loyal troops of his own.
The military command hates him, and the soldiers despise him.
He is sitting in the Winter Palace, utterly defenseless.
So what does this man, who spent months trying to suppress the working class, have to do?
He is forced to turn to the very people he was just conspiring to massacre.
He has to open the arsenals, arm the workers, and beg the Petrograd Soviet to save his life.
This is the definitive turning point of 1917.
The provisional government is exposed to the entire nation as a hollow, defenseless shell.
The defense of the capital and the defense of the revolution itself falls entirely to the working class.
The Soviet immediately springs into action.
They form a committee for struggle against the Counterrevolution.
They officially arm the factory workers, massively expanding the paramilitary groups known as the Red Guards.
And the Bolsheviks, many of whom had been imprisoned by Kerensky just weeks earlier.
Right. They are released from jail and immediately take leading roles in organizing the defense.
But what is truly remarkable about this segment of the history, the part that defies all traditional military logic, is how the coup is actually defeated.
Right. Traditional military history conditions us to expect a massive, bloody clash outside the gates of Petrograd.
Infantry lines, artillery barrages, cavalry charges.
But that doesn't happen.
The coup is entirely dismantled without a single pitched battle.
It is a logistical defeat.
How do you defeat the most elite cavalry in the empire, logistically?
You defeat them by utilizing the industrial nervous system of the country against them.
The infrastructure.
Yes. We often think of warfare purely in terms of tactics, artillery, and troop movements on a static map.
Moving pieces around.
But the workers' victory over Kornilov was a triumph of infrastructure and what Trotsky calls social interpenetration.
Social interpenetration. Okay, break that down for us. When Kornilov's troop trains approached Petrograd,
they didn't run into a defending army in trenches. They ran into the Railway Workers' Union, a massive, highly organized body known as Vikshol.
Vikshol. How did Vikshol actually operate? How did they stop a train full of angry officers holding guns to the engineers' heads?
Well, the officers assumed they controlled the trains because they gave orders to the engineer in the locomotive.
That makes sense.
But the engineer doesn't control the network. Vikshol controlled the network.
A whole grid.
Exactly. As Kornilov's trains moved forward, the railway workers simply took over the entire logistical grid.
What did that look like in practice?
They coordinated across hundreds of miles using their own Union telegraph lines. They tore up miles of physical tracks ahead of the troop trains.
Just unbolted them and moved them.
They built massive barricades out of lumber and scrap metal across the right-of-ways.
And most ingeniously, they manipulated the switches.
Oh, this is the best part.
Right. They deliberately sent Kornilov's troop trains onto the wrong branch lines, directing entire artillery regiments into blind alleys in the middle of forests.
Completely separating commanding officers from their combat units.
The elite forces were hopelessly lost and physically trapped in steel boxes.
It was a masterclass in infrastructural sabotage.
And it wasn't just the physical tracks, right? The communication network itself was weaponized.
Absolutely. The telegraph operators played an equally crucial role.
Because the generals need to communicate.
The conservative generals were accustomed to treating communications as a purely technical matter. You hand a message to an operator and it goes to the recipient.
Like a living fax machine.
Right. But they suddenly discovered that communications infrastructure is a deeply political entity.
So what did the telegraphers do?
They systematically held up Kornilov's orders. When a general sent a command to move a regiment, the operator just didn't send it.
Just toss it in the bin.
Or worse, they intercepted messages from Kornilov's military headquarters, copied them, and sent them directly to the Soviet in Petrograd so the workers knew every move the generals were planning.
Talk about an intelligence advantage.
At the same time, the telegraphers massively distributed the government's declaration of Kornilov's treason to every station and garrison in the country.
So everyone knows Kornilov is a traitor, but Kornilov doesn't know anything.
The generals were effectively rendered blind, deaf, and mute.
It is incredible. The workers didn't fight the military, they just turned off the country.
They weaponized the communication and transportation infrastructure to isolate the threat.
And while these elite troops are sitting in immobilized, freezing rail cars in the middle of nowhere, they get hit by the final, most devastating weapon of the revolution.
The agitators.
Yes, this is the phase of social interpenetration.
The workers didn't just stop the trains, they actively dismantled the ideological control the officers had over their men.
Take General Kremov's troops, for example.
Right, they were stuck at the Luga station, unable to move forward or backward.
And they weren't met by enemy artillery.
They were met by 20,000 armed soldiers from the local Luga garrison.
And what did they do?
These soldiers simply surrounded the trains and started talking to Kornilov's Cossacks.
Just talking to them.
The officers frantically tried to keep their men isolated in the cars, threatening them with execution if they fraternized, but it was impossible.
You can't shoot everyone.
Workers, local soldiers, railwaymen, they infiltrated the trains, shared their rations, and explained what was actually happening in Petrograd.
They explained that there was no German plot.
That the Soviets were not killing civilians.
And that the generals were using them to destroy the revolution.
And the story of the Savage Division is even more incredible.
Yeah, let's talk about them. These were the non-Russian speaking troops, the Chechens and Ingish, that Kerensky specifically wanted because he thought they'd be completely immune to this exact kind of propaganda.
Right. They couldn't understand the Russian railway workers.
But how did the Soviet handle them when they got stuck at a station called Veritsa?
The Soviet adapted brilliantly to the cultural reality.
They realized that sending Russian workers to shout at them in a language they didn't understand wouldn't work.
So instead of a military assault, they organized a specific Muslim delegation to meet them.
This delegation was made up of prominent Muslim figures from Petrograd.
And it included highly respected individuals, most notably the grandson of Imam Shamil.
Okay, who was Imam Shamil, for those who might not know? Why is his grandson significant?
Imam Shamil was a legendary Caucasian political and religious leader who had fiercely fought against Tsarist Russian imperialism in the 19th century.
So he was a big deal.
He was a hero of resistance to the very people who made up the Savage Division.
Wow. So sending his grandson was a stroke of absolute genius.
Because of the deeply ingrained ancient customs of hospitality and respect among the Caucasian mountaineers, the Kornilov officers, many of whom were Russian nobles, couldn't simply order their men to arrest or shoot these esteemed delegates.
I had to let them in.
The delegates were welcomed. They sat down with the soldiers in their native languages and translated the reality of the political situation.
They exposed the general's lies.
They explained that the troops were being used to destroy the revolution and restore the exact same oppressive czarist regime that had historically subjugated and slaughtered their ancestors.
The psychological impact of that must have been devastating to the officers' authority.
It was instantaneous. The Savage Division the most feared, hardened combat troops in the entire Russian army, literally raised a red flag over their command train.
And what did the flag say?
The flag read, "Land and Freedom."
That's amazing.
They then proceeded to arrest their own commanding officers and sent a delegation to Petrograd to pledge their loyalty to the Soviet.
The elite spearhead of the military coup simply dissolved into the revolution.
Yeah, vanished.
It is breathtaking. A military machine dismantled by railway switches and conversations.
But we have to emphasize a highly critical point here.
Which is?
The workers, the railwaymen, the Bolshevik agitators, they did not do this to save Alexander Kerensky.
Oh, absolutely not.
Trotsky makes this explicitly clear in his history, and Rabinowicz's archival work backs it up entirely. For the masses, this immense logistical and psychological mobilization was not about defending the provisional government. It was about defending the revolution itself.
They had absolutely zero trust in Kerensky.
They viewed him correctly as a compromised, aspiring dictator who had just been caught red-handed colluding with the enemy.
Their fight was to preserve the democratic gains of the Soviets.
To protect their own lives and to prevent a return to the old order.
They were fighting for themselves, not to prop up the prime minister in the Winter Palace.
And this incredible grassroots mobilization brings us to a major historical reevaluation, heavily based on Alexander Rabinowicz's findings.
Because everything we just discussed, the local garrisons acting on their own, the railway workers coordinating sabotage, the independent delegations, it completely shatters the monolith myth.
The monolith myth.
Yeah, for decades, especially during the Cold War, the accepted narrative in Western history books was that the Bolshevik Party was this rigid, top-down, monolithic, almost cult-like organization.
That was the standard story.
That Vladimir Lenin was a dictatorial mastermind who sat in a room, pushed buttons, and pulled off a flawless secret military coup against a totally passive Russian population.
That narrative dominated Western historiography for a very long time. It presented the revolution as a conspiracy rather than a mass movement.
But Rabinowitz, who was one of the first Western historians to gain deep, unfiltered access to Soviet archives, completely dismantled that narrative.
His meticulous research demonstrates that the Bolshevik Party of 1917 was the exact opposite of a rigid, obedient monolith.
What was it actually like?
It was deeply decentralized, highly chaotic, constantly argumentative, and profoundly embedded in the local working-class districts.
I love how some historians describe the vibe of the Bolsheviks in 1917. They didn't operate like a well-oiled Prussian military machine.
No, not at all.
They operated more like a chaotic, hyper-growth Silicon Valley startup that was scaling way too fast and was constantly fighting over internal strategy.
That's a funny way to put it, but it's true.
Lenin was often hiding in Finland, writing furious letters demanding immediate uprisings, and his own Central Committee in Petrograd would just ignore him, boon his letters, and pursue their own local strategies.
He had to fight tooth and nail just to get his own party leadership to agree with him half the time.
That chaotic energy is exactly what the archives reveal.
Rabinowitz found that the Bolsheviks' ultimate success in gaining the majority in the Soviets was not due to blind obedience to Lenin, but rather their democratic flexibility.
And their extreme, almost hypersensitive responsiveness to popular aspirations.
The masses in the factories and the trenches wanted three very simple things.
Peace, bread, and land.
Exactly. The provisional government and the moderate socialists repeatedly refused to deliver on any of those demands.
Because they were tied to the possessing classes, allied treaty obligations, and the continuation of the war effort.
So the Bolsheviks grew from a small, marginalized group into a massive majority party because they were the only political force actually listening to, articulating, and fighting for the immediate demands of the working class and the soldiers.
They didn't command the masses, they rode the wave of mass discontent.
Which fundamentally reframes the entire historical stakes of the summer and fall of 1917.
The analysis you just provided is crucial for understanding why things played out the way they did.
Yeah.
Because the choice facing Russia in the fall of 1917 wasn't the choice that people often assume it was.
That is the core takeaway from combining Trotsky's narrative with Rabinowicz's data.
A common historical misconception is that the choice facing the Russian people was between a polite, Western-style liberal parliamentary democracy led by Kerensky and the radical, violent socialism of the Bolsheviks.
But our sources show that this liberal democracy was already dead.
It was a phantom.
It was decaying faster than anyone realized because it had no roots in the actual physical power structures of the country.
So what was the actual choice?
The actual binary choice facing Russia by September 1917, after the Kornilov affair stripped away all the illusions, was either a fascist military dictatorship backed by the possessing classes who would drown the revolution in blood, or a workers' state governed by the Soviets and led by the Bolsheviks.
The middle ground, that peat bog, had completely evaporated.
It was gone.
I want to push you on those moderate socialists one more time. The Mensheviks and the right SRs who clung to that vanishing middle ground.
Okay, let's talk about them.
Why were they so stubborn? Was it just cowardice?
No, it wasn't just cowardice.
Because earlier you mentioned their theoretical justifications. The sources talk about how they literally had the power handed to them by the workers, and they refused it.
Right.
You're essentially saying that these moderate socialists were terrified to actually take state power because their Marxist theory books told them Russia wasn't economically ripe for socialism.
That is exactly what they believe.
They believed they had to wait for capitalism to mature first. It sounds like a starving man refusing to eat a massive meal that is placed right in front of him because he read a recipe book that says the meat technically needs to marinate for another century before it can be consumed.
That is a remarkably accurate, if darkly humorous, analogy for their political paralysis.
It's just so absurd.
The moderate socialists were entirely trapped by their own rigid interpretation of historical stages.
They genuinely, ideologically believed that Russia had to pass through a long, stable period of bourgeois capitalist democracy before a socialist revolution was theoretically possible.
So even when the physical power was literally handed to them by the workers and soldiers of the Petrograd Soviet, they frantically tried to hand it back to the terrified, unwilling bourgeoisie,
insisting that it wasn't their turn yet in the grand timeline of history.
This theoretical paralysis, this refusal to govern, is exactly what created the massive power vacuum that Kerensky tried to fill with his theatrics and that Kornilov tried to crush with his cavalry.
And how did the Bolsheviks react to that?
The Bolsheviks, particularly after Lenin reoriented the party's strategy, argued that the objective conditions of the World War, the total collapse of the Russian state, and the active threat of a military counterrevolution meant they couldn't afford to wait for a theoretical capitalist maturation.
The house is on fire. They couldn't wait for the fire department to be invented.
They argued they had to take power immediately through the Soviets, simply to save the country from total ruin and slaughter.
So if we pull all of this together, what does this actually mean?
It means a lot.
We've covered an incredible sweeping journey today. We started with a paralyzed, double-talking government holding fake conferences in Moscow.
We moved to a bizarre teletype conversation where a desperate prime minister tried to wiretap his own general.
And we ended with an elite, terrifying military force being completely dismantled by train switchmen, telegraph operators, and grassroots agitators speaking to soldiers in their native tongues.
Right.
Why does this deep dive matter to you, the listener, today? Why should we care about the logistical defeat of Lav or Kornilov over a century later?
It matters deeply because it provides a profound masterclass in how actual physical power works in a modern society.
Power does not reside simply in official titles, or in the ornate halls of parliaments, or in the flowery speeches of politicians.
And as the Kornilov affair brilliantly illustrates, power doesn't even reside exclusively in the bayonets and sabers of an army.
Where does it reside?
Ultimately, power resides fundamentally in the people who operate the infrastructure. The ones who control the trains, the telegraph lines, the factories, and the vital logistical arteries of a nation.
When those people, the workers, refuse to cooperate, when they coordinate their resistance, the most heavily armed elite military force in the world can be rendered completely impotent, blind, and trapped. It is a stunning realization of where the true levers of society are located. It strips away the illusion of authority and shows you the machinery underneath.
And it leaves us with a final provocative thought to consider.
What's that?
We've seen how the working class of 1917 used the physical infrastructure of their era, the railways and the telegraph networks, to completely paralyze a military coup without firing a single shot.
Right.
It makes you wonder, in our modern, hyper-connected world, if an authoritarian force tried to seize power today, could a society's digital infrastructure be weaponized in the exact same way by the people who build and maintain it?
Could the network operators, the software engineers, and the logistics workers shut down the grid to stop a modern Kornilov?
Or have modern governments and military forces learned Kornilov's lesson better than we have and secured the infrastructure against the very people who run it?
That is a deeply chilling and fascinating question to leave on.
It is.
It definitely makes you look at the server racks, the fiber optic cables, and the supply chains a little differently, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Maybe our modern version of the Tsar's magical wooden shingle is simply the arrogant assumption that we are somehow immune to these massive historical forces.
That's a great point.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the summer of 1917. Keep questioning the narrative. Look closely at how the machinery of your world actually operates, and we'll see you next time.